Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everyone. We are very happy to have you all join our session today about the first steps in the publishing process. The session will be delivered by Mr. Kevin McCormick, Head of Scholarly Communications and Research at University of Doha for Science and Technology Library. Kevin leads initiatives to advance open access, research visibility, and academic publishing. With over a decade of experience across libraries and archives in corporate finance, nonprofit, academic, and political military sectors, Kevin brings a uniquely interdisciplinary perspective to the evolving landscape of scholarly communication. Prior to his current role in Qatar, Kevin held library positions in Canada, Belgium, and Austria. He holds a Master of Information from the University of Toronto and is currently pursuing a PhD in Information and Communication at the University of Barcelona, focusing on publishing ethics in the Middle East and North Africa. We greatly appreciate you, Kevin, for being here today and for sharing some of your expertise with us. A few housekeeping notes. This session will be recorded, and we will be sharing the recording and the slides with you all. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will answer them at the end of the session. And last but not least, thank you all for joining us. I will leave the space now to you, Kevin.
Okay, thank you so much, Trace. Let me just get my screen together. Here. Hey. All right, well, thank you so much, Joyce, and the HBKU Library for inviting me today. I'm always pleased when we can do these cross-collaborative sharing of expertise across institutions here in Qatar. As a group, I do want to throw a lot of things at you, but and I want to make sure that I give you a lot of time towards the end for questions. So I'm going to aim for about 40 minutes and then questions. I encourage you all to read the slides while I'm speaking because there won't be exactly a one-for-one overlap. So let's just try to jump in here. Selecting journals, the right journal, isn't really just about picking your journal with the best stats or the highest quartile. Publications, they shape your research visibility, your credibility, and your impact. A well-matched journal ensures your work reaches just the right audience. It'll align with disciplinary expectations, and it'll enhance your overall academic reputation. So the goal for you is for your work is to be as discoverable as possible. To get there, we'll need to touch on a few concepts that will support you getting to where you want to be, including here we have assessing journal quality, exploring pre-submissions, understanding a little bit about open access, and how that interplay impacts your rights as an author. These are fairly linear and interlocking pieces that you kind of just need to be aware of. So the goal today is just general awareness. It's not necessarily that it's going to be, you'll know everything about these topics. It's kind of your taster to go and explore more, or to reach out to your library or Joyce to develop a more holistic view of these topics. In its simplest form, publishing really just means to make public. And there is a rich and storied history behind this. In the 1600s, the first scientific journals appeared, and it gave researchers this formal space to record their discoveries. And, these early journals, they were small and they were slow and sometimes a little bit chaotic. But what they created was the first shared scientific record. And then over time, these journals grew into trusted spaces where experts could review and validate each other's work. And by the 20th century, publishing had become an essential part of building knowledge, careers, and even research communities. Nowadays, there's many ways to make your research public. We have conferences, we have lab websites, social media, institutional repositories, preprint servers, books, and of course, what we're here for is scholarly journals. When we publish in journals, we're essentially putting our work to the wider scientific conversation. It's how other researchers discover what we've done and start to build on it. And the peer review process plays a huge role in that. It helps validate our findings and shows us that our methods and our conclusions can be trusted. Publishing also makes our work easier to find because journals get indexed and archived in these major databases that I'm sure you've all used through your academic careers so far. Because journals follow an established editorial standard, they help maintain that integrity and reliability of the research record. So in the end, publishing isn't just about getting something out there. It's about increasing your visibility and the impact of your work so it can actually do its job and influence the field. Being intentional about where you publish makes it easier and faster to be published. It ensures that you'll find the right audience for your journal, and it protects you from publishing in scam journals, what we call predatory publishers or predatory journals. And I'll mention that a little bit further on. It's my experience that faculty, not a lot, but in some cases, they're so focused on the research component and they're less concerned about being intentional about where they publish. Instead, they finish their project, they're on to the next grant, they're on to the next research project, and some of them are very content just to put the work out there, but just sort of hoping for the best. If you take the time to take journal selection, that process seriously, you'll be able to leapfrog your way much more effectively to where you want to go in your career, versus the colleagues that just sort of throw their articles to, the first 2 or 3 journals that they found. So when do you guys think we should start searching for possible journals? This is what you see on your screen is from Nature data. They've researched, they surveyed researchers and presented their findings online. Now, the experts at Nature feel that the optimum time to start searching for a journal is before you've written the paper. And for the most part, I actually tend to agree with this. But you could start the process during the experimentation and analysis stage, as you start to understand, what data you have and what the data might suggest. And it can also be helpful, I think, to have an idea of the type of journal you're aiming for to publish in before you even start your experiments, during the design and planning stage. Regardless, I like this data because it encourages you to start thinking about journals early on, but it also sort of serves as a reminder that, it's not too late, regardless of where you are in your research, to start thinking about this. And it shows that researchers are fairly evenly split about when they start thinking about journal publications. It's entirely up to you when you want to start thinking about publications seriously. By identifying possible target journals early in the research life cycle, you'll gain some pretty important information on what is to be expected in a high quality research paper for the more reputable journals in your field. Checking out papers that address similar hypotheses or questions that could help best inform how to design your study. And you'll see how editors and peer reviewers in that journal want to see their papers, coming through and being published. Understanding how authors in the field have analyzed and reported their data and used those statistics may actually help you plan your analysis. So following in the steps of others. Checking the article information for similar studies can reveal, what declarations authors have made about their research, the data, the code, the materials, maybe the competing interests. Understanding the aims and scope of different journals can help you think about the aims and scope of your research and who your end audience is or who your end users will be. And having an audience or, end user in mind or an end reader in mind, you'll kind of help to begin your project and help think about, what the research output should include in the paper. And exploring different article formats and types of papers available can actually influence what you publish and when you publish it. So building off that manuscript formatting idea, because there's really nowhere else in this slide deck that kind of organically fits, I feel like I want to give you some general overviews about what kind of manuscript formatting targets you can expect. And now this isn't the rule and it's not the norm, and I don't want to go into explaining APA style and Harvard style, and that's separate part of your research that you can do elsewhere. I want to talk more about word counts, which can vary drastically. Mostly you'll see articles in the 6,000 to 10,000 word range. I think 6,000 to 8,000 is the sweet spot for a lot of journals. Of course, some disciplines require substantially more words to address the complexity of the topic. So it'll depend also, sometimes on the fields. Short reports, you might know them as brief communications. These comprise of shorter summaries of research, such as reports with emerging findings or in highly competitive or time-sensitive fields before, some publication before more extensive results are generated. These are shorter, typically 1,000 to 3,000 words in length, and they're only supported by a couple of display items, and by that I mean tables, for example. We saw a lot of these during COVID, for example. Some journals offer a format called registered reports. The key idea is that your study gets peer reviewed before you collect any data. So instead of writing the whole paper at the end, you first submit your research question, your hypotheses, your methods, and how you plan to analyze the data. And then reviewers will look at whether that question is meaningful and whether whether the methods are solid. So this is another type of publication prior to the one that you'll have submitting with your final findings. So there's a lot that you can do with your research, and a lot of ways that journals are willing to engage with you and your research. I get asked a lot if I can just reach out to a journal and ask if they're interested before they submit. Like, would the journal be interested in my work? Sometimes you can, actually. This is what's called a pre-submission inquiry. It's a pretty simple, it's a simple and quick way to ask a journal whether they might be a good fit before you go through the full submission process and you do their citation style guides and put all that work into it. It's never required for primary research articles, but some journals do offer it as an optional service. If the journal does accept these inquiries, they usually just give you high-level feedback, mainly whether your topic fits the aims and scope and whether the findings seem relevant enough for that journal to consider. This can be really helpful. It can assure you that you're aiming in the right place to find your right audience. And it can save you a lot of time by steering you away from journals that isn't a good match. Some journals are really strong in your field, but just not the right match for your particular paper this time. But it's important to remember that a positive response from these journals and a pre-submission inquiry is not a promise of acceptance. The manuscript can still be rejected later, even before it reaches that peer review process. And different journals will treat pre-submission inquiries differently. So always check their policy online. Some journals, like Current Biology, for example, they actively encourage pre-submission inquiries, while others, especially in the Nature portfolio, they allow pre-submission inquiries, but generally they prefer you just to submit the full paper for a proper assessment. Pre-submission inquiries are much more common when you're pitching reviews, perspectives, or opinion pieces, because those type of articles are often commissioned in advance. So the editors need to know what's coming and avoid overlap with work that's already planned. So it might not be just for your research paper. Maybe you have an opinion piece that you want to supplement in a journal. And lastly, timing matters. The best moment for you to send your pre-submission inquiry is after you've written your initial draft, you have a clear understanding of your results and the conclusion and the impact of your work. And that way you can explain and justify exactly why you think it's a good fit for the journal. So when you write a pre-submission inquiry, you want to give the editor a clear, compact sense of what your study is about and why it might be a good fit for their journal. Start with simply 1 or 2 sentences that introduce the field, something any scientist could understand, or in the general field of academia. Then add a couple sentences, a bit more background for people that are in your related disciplines, and after that, a briefly state the core problem of your research, what it addresses, following probably by a single sentence summarizing your main results. So phrases like "here we show" really work really well here. Next, explain just in a few sentences what your results means compared to what was previously known, or how it advances our understanding of the area. Once that's clear, zoom out a little bit and put your findings into a broader scientific context. And finally, end with a short, big picture perspective that makes sense to scientists across disciplines. The idea here is to give the editors just enough information to judge interest and fit without overwhelming them with the details. Peer review models. Peer reviews models are something that you'll see when you look up a journal. It'll tell you what type of peer review they're going to do with your paper. And some people don't know the differences here. Some people prefer some models over another. Let's just get into what these terms mean and possibly how they can help you. Peer review models describe how much information authors and reviewers can see about each other. So in a single blind review, reviewers know who the authors are, but the authors don't know who the reviewers are. in most cases. Most journals, especially in STEM fields, tend to use single blind reviews just because it's easier to administrate. And reviewers often kind of need to know a little bit more about the author's affiliation for context. And by context, I mean like their methods, their data sets, their prior work. Double blind reviews, I think, are sort of the default for many publishers. In this situation, both sides are anonymous, so the authors and the reviewers don't see each other. I kind of like this one. It helps to reduce biases around identity, around gender, around career stage, institutions, or seniority. This is a more common approach in social sciences and the humanities, I admit. But what it can do for you is that if you find a journal that you want to publish in and it has double-blind peer review, it can increase the fairness for early career researchers, which I know a lot of you are. And it's also tries to level the playing field from authors from less represented regions. So for those starting out, if a double-blind peer review is an option for you, I really do recommend starting there. But again, it'll depend on what fields and what journals are willing to use it. Some journals now use open peer review, where the identities and sometimes review reports, for example, are shared openly to make the process more transparent, so you can see what the peer reviewer's notes are about your paper and what the feedback kind of openly. Each model has its own strengths, and journals tend to choose the approach that best supports their fairness, what they can offer, their rigor, and then also, of course, disciplinary norms. So bear in mind these peer review models when you're looking for a home for your research papers. When I think about journal quality, I'm not really looking at statistics, though we will discuss those aspects very shortly. I think a lot of people run straight to the numbers when they think about journal quality. Firstly, I always ask whether the journal is trusted in the field. If other researchers cite it or speak well of it, that's a good sign. If it's a newer journal, I tend to look at who's publishing it. And more well-known publishers will usually maintain solid standards across the bar. I try to see where these journals might be indexed and whether, just if it's a legitimate publication. And when I can't tell, I run and ask a librarian. Please know you can send your libraries quick emails at any time asking them to review a publication for its legitimacy. It's never a bad idea to ask for a second set of eyes. Next, I want to know whether the journal is actually publishing strong work. Does it choose studies that matter? Does it help move the field forward? If yes, then it's likely a good fit. So looking at a journal often means actually reading some of the papers in the last couple issues to see if you want to be amongst them. I also zoom out a bit and check the editorial board as well as the peer review process. A respected and diverse board suggests that the journal takes quality seriously, and a clear, rigorous peer review policy means your work will be evaluated properly. So these are some elements you can look at to see if your journals is going to be decent. And finally, transparency is key. Good journals will be open about how they operate, how they review papers, what their policies are, what fees they charge. If that information is hard to find, I'm very, very cautious. And again, this is when you think, okay, let me go ask my librarian or a senior researcher that you trust for help. Apologies. I have a host of reasons that I don't want you to rely entirely on the numbers for choosing your journal. But I think you at first need to understand the numbers to decide if that's something that you're really going to heavily lean on. So here it is. The first number to consider, which actually I think is meaningful and has bearing on your life, is the acceptance and rejection rates. Obviously, this tells you how selective a journal is. And you should know the average acceptance rate is around 32% across journals globally. People think it's less because there's always looking at the more selective journals, the top 10%. But across the board, you're looking at around 32. When we talk about journal metrics, the two most common ones that you'll hear about are the journal impact factor and the cite score. They're both basically just averages. They tell us how often papers and journals are being cited, but the way they calculate those averages are a little bit different. So bear with me here. For the journal impact factor, the formula looks at a very short window. It counts how many times in a given year papers published in the previous 2 years were cited. So if we're in 2026 now, this formula is going to be 2025, 2024. The total then becomes the numerator, and then it's divided by the number by how many articles and reviews were published in those same 2 years. So essentially, citations over article count. But this is only for this tight little 2-year slice. So the methodology, I think, is a little bit imperfect. The average number of citations per paper can also be skewed if 1 or 2 articles do especially well, and that'll bump up the reputation of the overall journal maybe a little bit more than it deserves. Or if it's they're publishing articles with a lot of citations and then they're being cited poorly, these equations don't necessarily consider citations about poorly done, flawed research that everyone's sort of jumping on. Cite scores, on the other hand, use a broader 4-year window, and it counts all documents, not just articles and reviews. So the formula is citations of a given year to everything the journal has published in the last 4 years, divided by the number of documents published in those same 4 years. So the cite score is a little bit more transparent than the journal impact factor, as it doesn't attempt to classify or limit article types, but it's biased against journals that publish editorials, news, letters. So both metrics kind of give you a sense of the journal's reach, how often it's cited. It can be helpful indicators when comparing journals or thinking about where to publish your work, but it's not perfect. And they were created by large for-profit companies. That means they reflect their choice about what to count and what not to count, and what counts as impact. And most importantly, they are not the be-all and end-all of journal quality. Plenty of excellent, rigorous, and highly relevant journals do not sit in the top 10% of these indexes. Some very, very strong journals serve specialized communities. Some very strong journals are actually newer, created out of the need. And some simply don't play well with the narrow citation windows that these provide. Some papers have the longevity that they over a greater amount of time they'll surge and be cited very, very well. So these metrics, they can be useful to you, but they're just one piece of a bigger picture. I'm constantly talking to faculty about their journals, and the first thing they'll tell me is that it's Q1, or if it's got a certain number to it, but certain site score, and I'm like, great, tell me more. There are other metrics that are becoming increasingly important, like alt metrics, for example, which means the amount of times an article from that journal has appeared in the news or in social media. And universities are really starting to consider this alt metric in their promotion and tenure criteria. To be in alt metrics is to really show your real world impact. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for these readers who are actually engaging with your work. And a high alt score means you've published really in the right journal. So this is a screen grab from something called Cable's Journalytics software, which is something I have access to, but it isn't necessarily available at all institutions. And what it provides me is a snapshot of information about journal's quality. It has more things than you're seeing here: submission guidelines, expertise, scope, and content. It's all one-stop shopping. But in this image, it's tracking the amount of times their articles, this journal's articles, have been mentioned across social media platforms, citation software, patents, policies, blogs, Wikipedia. And you can even see on the left, the median mentions per article is about 13. So, the average article in this journal gets 13 mentions at least in one of these places. You can even go further into these metrics and see the geographic breakdown of your reach, and you can even see the demographic breakdown. So the article on the bottom right here, Economic Costs of Diabetes in the US in 2017, it's performing in the top 5% of all research outputs that Altmetrics scores. They even shared their demographic breakdown, so not on your screen, but it was able to show me that most members of the public, it's mostly members of the public that are sharing this article, and then it's practitioners like doctors and healthcare workers, and then scientists, and then science communicators, people like myself, journalists, bloggers, editors. So, this is kind of a new metric that maybe you might take into consideration when you're shopping for a journal. So taking a step back, you really need to understand how the publishing process works, and it has the mode of publishing is really important for choosing a journal. So I want to talk to you a little bit about traditional models of publishing and open access, which is a bit newer. You may have heard these terms before, but now you're going to be able to confidently distinguish between them. So for a long time, scientific publishing followed a very traditional model. The reader, or more likely their library or their institution, would pay for access for new research. So the articles sat behind paywalls, and the publishers earned their income from subscription to those paywalls. For authors, this model was usually free at the point of publication. But the downside was fewer people could actually read the work unless they had access through a subscription of their own. And today we're seeing a big shift towards open access. Here it's flipped. The reader pays nothing, and the articles are available to anyone, anywhere, anytime. And instead, the author, or more realistically, the funder, the grant funder, or the institution, or if you're in Qatar, sometimes Qatar National Library, they will be the ones who pay to cover the publication costs of the journal. And because articles are free to read, they can reach a much wider audience and often get cited a lot more quickly. Importantly, I think the difference between subscription and open access is not about quality. Both models use the same peer review standards, the same editorial board oversight, the same expectations for research integrity. I hear a lot of particularly older generation researchers tell me that open access articles are lesser than. That is not the case. The case is that it's just your finance department has decided on these two different models. It has not impacted the editors or the ethics section of these journals. The real difference is about who pays, who can read the work, and what rights the authors keep. In the subscription model, the publisher usually holds most of the rights, and readers, face the paywall. In open access, again flipped, the author typically keeps their copyright through Creative Commons licensing, but the author or the institution that they come from pays a sometimes substantial fee. And it's also keep in mind that both of these models are part of this larger commercial publishing system. So these companies, whether they offer subscription journals or open access journals or a hybrid of both, they are for-profit businesses. And these publishing models and the fees attached to them really do reflect that reality. So while open access increases visibility and subscription journals have a long, strong history, for their reputation, neither model, I should say, is the sole marker for quality. But I am someone who strongly believes in evening the playing field in the knowledge economy between the global north and the global south. And open access provides that access to information that most and many global south universities and researchers cannot afford. They can't afford to access through the paywalls. I spend a lot of time with faculty reviewing their grants and suggesting that they put aside some funds to pay the open access charges, what we call the author processing charges. But here we're here so that you can decide what's best for where you should publish. So let's talk a little bit about what open access can do for you. There has been a seismic shift in the literature in the past, from about 15 years ago to what's published 10 years ago and even 5 years ago about the reach that open access has. We've seen in the recent decade that open access publications seem to fare better when it comes to citation downloads and impact than those papers that are published behind paywalls, particularly within the first 2 years of publication. So remember, going back to that journal impact factor, we're looking at the first 2 years of publication here. Compared to traditional publishing with the paywalls and everything, on average, open access will receive about 1.6 times more citations than their non-open access counterpart. You'll see about 4 times more downloads on an open access article than its non-open access counterpart. You'll receive about 2.5 times more altmetric attention. So remember, that was the being cited in the news and on X and LinkedIn and policies and patents. And that altmetrics, that looks at real-time engagement. So who's talking about your research, sharing it, recommending it, saving it? And lastly, open access articles typically attract 1.9 times more news mentions and 1.2 times more policy mentions overall than the research that's kind of published behind paywalls. When we talk about these fees, these author processing charges, article processing charges, most people kind of want to run for the hills. But let's explain a little bit about what they are first. These are flat fees that authors pay, usually, almost always in open access journals, after the paper has been accepted. The range is huge. I've seen APCs as low as 100 US, and I've seen them as high as 12,600 US. Typically over 1,500 US, less than 4,500 US. I would say the price points that I've seen. So again, knowing where you want to publish in advance, and particularly when you're thinking about grants and the funding you have, thinking about where you want to publish is going to help you pay for some of these publications. What I want to impart upon you is that APCs are not submission fees. You're not paying, or you will never be paying, I hope, to have your manuscript just looked at. What APCs actually cover is the publisher's work behind the scenes, the editorial office, managing peer review, coordinating reviewers, maintaining the publishing platform, production tasks, like layout or formatting, copy editing, indexing, and of course, the long-term preservation of your article. They also help fund the journal's ongoing promotion, so the journal continues to perform well in the scholarly ecosystem. So a reputable journal will always tell you what the APC is in advance. It should be on their website. If the fee isn't clearly listed, that's a huge red flag, and probably a perfect moment for you to ask a librarian for help if you're still considering that journal. Now, the traditional subscription publishing method, authors usually don't pay APCs because the journal makes its money from the libraries and the readers and going through the paywalls and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that traditional publishing is always free. Some subscription journals charge page fees if your article exceeds a certain length. They sometimes charge color charges if you want your figures printed in color. For example, I have on the screen Nature research journals list their color charges, and they range, in the hundreds of dollars here. But again, this is easy to pull because they're transparent about how much it's going to cost you on their website. Diamond Open Access is sort of unique in that open access ecosystem. It is the most accessible form of open access publishing because no one pays. I mean, for your purpose, no one pays. The author doesn't pay and the reader doesn't pay. Everything is free at both ends. So instead of charging APCs, Diamond journals find their support through their institutions. So like a university might sponsor it, library consortia, scholarly societies, government funding might be at play, or just general community support. What makes Diamond Open Access special is that it removes those financial barriers entirely. Authors can publish without worrying about APCs. Readers anywhere in the world can immediately access and see these research without those paywalls. Diamond Open Access, they usually focus on community values, research-led governance. They're very big in transparency, very, very catered to disciplines' needs, and very, very active about long-term knowledge preservation. Most Diamond journals, however, are smaller. They're often run by an academic community or a learned society, but they follow the same scholarly standards and editorial standards that traditional journals and other open access journals follow. The same high quality peer review, editorial oversight, they're indexed. It's just, it doesn't have the same commercial motives or profit-driven pricing models that we see in regular open access or traditional publishing. Diamond Open Access is really here to support that equitable publishing for people that don't have APC funding. So remember when I said the average acceptance rate is about 32% for journals globally? Well, there is no global reliable average acceptance rate for Diamond Open Access journals that I'm aware of. And this is because no major study has ever collected those acceptance rates data for this particular group, Diamond Open Access. And to be honest, it's because Diamond journals rarely publish their acceptance rate. And people tend to think that because Diamond Open Access is free, it's more competitive because surely everyone is applying, sending their papers to them. But in truth, their acceptance rates tend to be a little bit higher than large commercial open access journals are. But it's not because of lower quality. It's because they receive fewer submissions actually overall and have very, very, very focused scopes. So if you find a Diamond Open Access journal that's of interest to you and and the scope is like really on point, I mean, that's amazing. You've hit the academic lottery ticket there. But really the scope of the journal is what you have to make sure your article fits. Predatory publishing that I was talking about a little bit earlier is sort of the dark side of open access that I just want to briefly forewarn you about. Predatory publishing, it refers to scam journals that pretend to be legitimate open access journals or publishers. But what they don't provide is that real peer review. They say they're going to do this editorial oversight and quality control, but they don't. They often scam researchers with these flattering invitation emails, or you might find them on the web, or if you a nerd like me, your Instagram algorithm will bring you these promises from these scam journals that promise unrealistically fast publication, like time to publication times, like 2 weeks or 1 month to publication. Or they'll charge fees without offering some of the services that you might expect. Their goal is profit, not scholarship. And within the academic community, these journals can actually damage your reputation as a researcher. It's a waste of your funding. And if you publish with them, it buries what is, I know, going to be very good work in places where it won't be read and it won't be trusted. So it's important for authors, and particularly early career researchers who are especially vulnerable to this when they don't really know the difference between a legitimate publisher and an illegitimate publisher on the web, to know that it's valuable to you to know that while open access is a very valuable publishing model, it's also created a space for these unethical actors to exploit that whole author pays system. So this is yet another time where I would be asking a librarian or a senior researcher to vet my journals for me, because if you're interested in submitting there, and it looks good, but you've only just found it on the web or you've been invited to publish there, another set of eyes really doesn't hurt. I really, really want you to be careful of especially unsolicited emails for publication or conferences. That's a different story. In traditional publishing or by subscription publishing, authors usually sign over some of their copyright to the publisher, which means when you handed over your research paper to them and they've published it, the publisher now controls how that article can be shared or reused. Authors can still use the work in certain ways, but distribution is often limited. The final version typically sits behind a paywall. In open access publishing, the author generally retains their copyright, and then it's published under a Creative Commons license, which sets out, how others can share it or reuse the work. The key difference is that open access puts the author in control of their rights and makes, that research kind of completely freely available to readers. Either way, the goal is the same, ensuring your work is published, preserved, and properly attributed. But the level of control you keep over your own article can differ slightly depending on the model of publication you choose. So for example, keeping your rights means, going the open access way and keeping your rights means you can post your paper freely on your own personal website. It can go entirely on your institutional repository. It can be posted freely on social media platforms like, LinkedIn, or if you wanted ResearchGate, without asking any permission from the publisher. So at conferences, you can freely include your articles, your published figures in the text can be in the slides or your handouts or your recordings. And in teaching, you can share your article with students directly instead of directing them to the paywall that they might not be able to access. I have lots of faculty who publish will then come to the library and say, hey, my students need access to my paper. And it's not in one of my subscription databases. So we have to then go and pay for it a little bit extra. So when colleagues or, international collaborators, if they want a copy, if you're publishing open access, you can simply send it. No restrictions, no awkward emails asking publishers what you're allowed to do. So I would say that open access does help researchers reach that broader audience, particularly people in low-resourced institutions. It'll help make your work discoverable by those practitioners, those policymakers, industry partners, independent scholars, journalists, what have you, anyone that might benefit from your work but doesn't have that subscription. Which again, more visibility, more citations, more opportunities to connect with new collaborators. We're coming to the end of the presentation, I promise. And I'm going to drop some terrible news on you. all of you are going to experience rejection at some point in your careers from journals. Do not be disheartened. It is often not a reflection of the quality of your work. It's usually due to misalignment with scope and content of the journal against your research paper. And but sometimes with the open peer review models, you'll get that feedback back. Sometimes you'll get like generic, thank you for submitting high quality research, though we're not going that direction. It's usually a scope and content issue. But even when you pass that level of screening, your paper can receive a rejection at any point of its review. So on the screen, I have the most common reasons for what we call a desk rejection, which I won't read, but you can look over. Desk rejections are typically handled by the editor or the publishing staff, not necessarily the expert that's going to later conduct your peer review, though in some cases those two can be the same. But I do want to leave you here kind of comfortable with rejection, and it's not personal. Do not be disheartened if you're unsuccessful with the first journal you submit to. Keep in mind that the average acceptance rate I gave you was 32%, and top tier journals can be around the 10% mark. Rejection rates, they vary widely by field and by journal type. High impact journals tend to reject most submissions because they receive just a large volume of manuscripts and they have very, very strict standards. Other journals, especially in broader scope or open access models, may accept a larger portion of papers. So open access actually has higher acceptance rates than traditional subscription journals. And again, it's not because of lower quality. It's because they typically they'll typically evaluate manuscripts differently. So open access journals typically focus on methodological, the soundness of your study, not really the novelty of your study. A lot of the articles behind paywalls, they're looking for the novelty. So when the criteria for publication is methodology, and if it's solid and the data is valid and the conclusions follow logically, the paper is still publishable. You might have heard of this before. Sometimes we call it sound science, and it's kind of found in mega journals. And if not, you'll hear about it in your career. But these open access places are good places for you to publish your negative results or null results, because these journals make room for solid but incremental advancements in science. Sometimes when the novelty isn't there, and reminder that the novelty is not the most important thing, you can still find that publication. And I want to also add that some non-native English speakers also feel that there's a language quality barrier to entry to publication. On top of both, desk rejection and rejection at later stage of the peer review, it's perceived that you'll get a higher rejection. The rejection rate is higher for non-English native speakers than it is for native English speakers because of a linguistic disadvantage, given especially that English is the primary language of scientific communication and publishing. Of course, this opens up a whole wide world of conversation about the importance of publishing within region, publishing in our mother languages, and having manuscript translation service, maybe embedded in the grants budget. But that may be something to keep in mind when you're looking, for your next project, or keeping in mind when you're looking for co-authors or collaborators. But in the end, rejection is just a normal part of the academic process. I wanted to end with the rejection slide, but then I thought, maybe that's too grim. So let's end with the submission checklist. This is less about selecting journals and more about where most students and early career researchers make the first errors in submitting to journals. So before submitting, it kind of helps to run through, a quick checklist to make sure everything is in order. This usually includes preparing a clean, well-formatted manuscript, but also checking the journal's word limits and figure requirements, and ensuring that all co-authors have, an approved final version. Your cover letter, very, very, very important. Your cover letter should help editors understand why the paper belongs in their journal, what the main contribution is, why the findings matter, and maybe other things like if there's a competing manuscript somewhere else. Students, often overlook this entirely. You'll need other things like an ORCID ID or ORCID number. If you don't know what that is, it's time to run to your local library, your HBKU library. You will need ethical approval statements if that's relevant to your research, properly labeled figures and tables. Finally, make sure that your references are in an accurately in the style that your journal intended. Your files and formats, are in the formats the journal's requested. Any data availability or conflict of interest statements, they're complete. So a quick checklist like that will save you a bit of time in the submission system. And each journal is going to have submission guidelines put on their website for you to review, but they can be lengthy. So brace yourself. So, and again, kind of harking back to the earlier you pick a journal, you could spend the entire time writing with that journal's style in mind. So I hope that sort of neatly packages the intro to publishing back for you. Thank you all for your time. My email address is in here. If you want to contact me, you are all very welcome to. And I will stop sharing and we can start discussing questions. Is that right, Joyce?
Yes, thank you so much, Kevin, for this insightful and informative presentation. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll give you the mic. Or if you prefer to drop your question in the chat, we will also look into it. And in the meantime, I just want to remind everyone that this has been recorded and we will be sharing with you the recording as well as the slides that Kevin used.
Pass along the slides. Absolutely.
Yes, Maimuna, go ahead. I think you should be able to unmute. We cannot hear you.
So can't hear.
Maimuna, can you hear us?
Perhaps you can type in the chat if that's easier for you. It says you're muted.
Maimuna, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Just
we have a question in the chat.
Okay, I'll answer that while your audio sorted. How to search and verify Diamond Open Access journals, DOAJ. Is there any other database as well? There are discipline-specific ones. I don't have any up that I can show you, but it is a very good question. There's let's see if I can pull. There's the forgetting what it's called. There's a Norwegian registry. I think if you just search that with open access journals, you'll be able to find something along that. It is very Euro-centric, but it's cross-disciplinary. There's I think a diamondopenjournals.com or diamondopen.com, and they have a list there. But if you go into some of the major publishers, like for example Emerald Publishing, even though they're a for-profit company, they do also have Diamond Open Access, so you can actually search their journals and filter for Diamond. But I admit they're a little bit harder to find. So again, maybe the librarian can help you with that. But I have some tools at my disposal that I use. That Cables Analytics that I showed you. They can kind of help me with that. Those type of things. But it is kind of just a web browsing search, unfortunately. Well spotted with DOAJ though. That would have been my go-to if you didn't send it. DOAJ is the Directory of Open Access Journals for anybody else interested. That is a very good place to start. How can we figure out if a journal is predatory? Oh, that is my favorite. That is my favorite topic. So there's sort of a host of hints, and what what we use, let me just pull it up and I'll put it in the chat. So there's this kind of nonprofit movement that we call Think, Check, Submit. And what it offers is like tools and practical resources to kind of educate researchers about the integrity of journals. So it gives you specifically in the second link kind of a checklist of things that you should see on a journal's website. Now, I will say there's other things to be noticed. About a third of predatory journals have some sort of spelling mistake on their website somewhere. That's a big red flag. A lot of the time, they're missing key indicators. They'll have, they won't have an archives policy, or they won't have, they won't tell you what their ethics statement is. Maybe there's a button for it, but that URL doesn't go anywhere. There's all sorts of, there's also sort of data validating you can check. Like a lot of predatory websites will tell you that, oh, don't worry, I'm indexed in Scopus and Web of Science. And it's kind of up to your due diligence to go into Scopus or Web of Science to actually make sure that they're indexed where they say that they are. My favorite was one journal told on their website that they were indexed in Cables. And it was true, they were indexed in Cables, but they were indexed as a predatory journal. But I mean, technically they weren't lying. So, you want to kind of verify all of the things that you're seeing on their website, by another website. So, a lot of them will say they're current members of the Committee of Publishing Ethics. And so you should go to the Committee on Publishing Ethics and see who their current members are. Generally, I think in all cases, you're safe if you can find a journal on the Directory of Open Access Journals. But there's other safe places. There's Latindex for the Latin America, Caribbean, Spanish, Portuguese journals. But we don't really have the equivalent in the Middle East, unfortunately. But again, if you have suspicions about your journal being predatory or something like that, please reach out to your library. They kind of have the expertise to do an evaluation, and they can do an evaluation with you, so you can kind of get that practice of looking.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Any other questions? All right.
Well, thank you all for this opportunity. I appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun for me. I hope it was valuable to you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. We greatly appreciate having you with us today. Thank you so much for sharing all of this information with us. And I have just posted in the chat the link for your feedback. So we greatly appreciate all of your feedback via a very short form. And we will be sending you the recording as well as the slides shortly, if not today, the maximum by tomorrow morning. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Kevin, again for sharing with us your expertise. And we wish you all a very lovely day.